What's up, guys? Tommy Bowyer here from Movie Rewind. I am once again joined by MLC, and today we'll be counting down our top three favourite trilogies. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our annual discussion held every month, not on a specific day because we're too busy to have just one specific day.
Yeah.
I am joined by MLC.
Hello,
How
everyone.
are you, MLC?
I am doing wonderful. We're back here discussing movies. The month of March and April have not been the best for movies. We've had the long anticipated and longly delayed Morbius come out, which was absolute rubbish, so I didn't see it. So instead I went to see Sonic the Hedgehog 2, which was actually pretty good. I've also seen a Michael Bay's Ambulance in the cinema as well, which is a Michael Bay movie. Moving on.
How was that? Was it just a Michael Bay
movie? Moving on.
Okay, well, that sums it up. That sums it up. And actually, speaking of Michael Bay is one of many directors who have conducted a movie trilogy in his time. And that is why I thought it would be a great idea today to understand what our opinions are, but also try and understand, because I don't know what films they're going to pick. They don't know what films I'm going to pick. So we thought today would be a great opportunity to count down our top three favourite movie trilogies. Yeah, I could have said that better, but what the hell? So, little disclaimer, a couple of disclaimers. Firstly, this is just two people on the internet's opinion. It's
Last
not
time
the
we did that, we got changed to that.
Yeah, I know. This is not the definitive opinion. You know, we're not critics. We don't have film media study qualifications, whatever you want to call it. So this is purely based on our opinion. Secondly, we're saying favourite film trilogies. This doesn't necessarily mean the best film trilogies, because obviously there could be film trilogies which we think are amazing, but others think are garbage. And thirdly, and probably one of the most important reasons is we're looking at trilogies as a whole. Now, you can have a trilogy which has one amazing film and two rubbish films, and vice versa. So we are looking at trilogies as a whole. So please bear that in mind while you're watching this video. Yeah, the complete package, as MLC said. So I think it'll be a great idea to let them start. So MLC, your first favourite film movie trilogy.
Now, for my favourite trilogies of all time, I did a lot of consideration for what would be my favourite, because there's a lot of trilogies I love, like a lot of film series that I love and they're my absolute favourite of all time, and which consists of some of my favourite movies. But as we're looking at as the trilogy as a whole, a lot of film trilogies have like one dud in the middle or at the end, which like brings the trilogy down as a whole. But we have to look at the trilogy, not like, for example, the Spider-Man trilogy. Like, I would like to pick that one, but because Spider-Man 1 and 2, amazing, perfect, and Spider-Man 3 brings the trilogy as a whole down. It's the ending to that. So if I could like pick those two movies, it would make my list. But the fact we have to look at it all combined as a one complete package made it really difficult for me, because that, like I said, there's so many movies I love, but because of certain movies during that trilogy, it makes the complete package as a whole instead of each individual movie. So that's made it more difficult. I've also considered a lot of movies where I looked at trilogies as a whole package, not like, for example, like an MCU movie, in my opinion, where I can't just look at them as, for example, I can't look at the recent Spider-Man trilogy as three separate movies, because that story, that progression's continued on from Captain America to Avengers movies and stuff. So I can't look at that story as a separate block because it's part of all these other movies. So I can't look at it as a trilogy on its own like that. So that's made it difficult for me personally. But I have to say, my first trilogy that I will be starting off with will be The Lord of the Rings.
Yep. Yeah, not surprised. Not
Now, the Lord of the
surprised.
Rings movies, I just absolutely love and adore. The Hobbit won't be featuring on my list today because well, the Hobbit simply wasn't as good as the Lord of the Rings trilogies. It didn't look as good. Of course, they used a lot more CGI and stuff in the Hobbit compared to the Lord of the Rings, which I feel made the film feel even faker. Whereas the Lord of the Rings had perfect use of cinematography and practical effects that made it feel so real without having to go crazy on the CGI. Yes, of course, they had to use CGI for some bits, but in terms of like all the villains, all the bad guys and stuff, you know, actual set design, a lot of it was all physical props. So from a set design and stuff, absolutely brilliant. And in fact, I would say groundbreaking for the time for doing such big scale things, such a big scale project. But what draws me to the Lord of the Rings, that of course it's a trilogy. You could argue that of course it's one story drawn out across 3 movies because the book's that big.
Yeah.
But I really do feel like that it is one of my favourite film trilogies because of the story, the characters, the journey that you go on. It is one hell of a roller coaster, one hell of an adventure that you go on each movie. It's not like some self-contained thing where it's like a small scope and everything, and it's just one movie, you know, basically repeating itself in the sequel, and then again the third movie, basically just rehashes slightly different flavors. It's an entire adventure. Every movie, while you know, it totally still feels quite similar because of how the story progresses on and how and where we go with our characters and stuff. It makes it feel like that each movie is different and it's worth the sequel that it merits. Yeah,
Yeah.
from the characters we meet to the visuals to the action. Yeah, it's quite an impactful and profound story. Of course, there's a lot of issues with these movies. You could argue about the length or how pacing in certain bits, but overall, the Lord of the Rings trilogy is a fantastic watch, and I think, in my opinion, it can't be something that you can't avoid in modern movie history. It's a defining movie trilogy of the era. And yes, you could argue, yes, it's a book adaptation, so therefore a lot of the writing and a lot of the good stories was done beforehand in book form by someone else. But it still doesn't take away from the experience, enjoyable experiences. And I don't know, just the thrill of watching it for the first time, meeting all these characters and all these new landscapes and all this rich lore, because the Lord of the Rings series is full of so much lore and so much thought that you can invest yourself into this world. It doesn't feel fake or unbelievable. There's just been so much thought put into this world that every single thing makes sense. I mean, for example, just look at the language like the elves speak. Now, like a lot of like fantasy movies, like elven people might speak some random gibberish they just put subtitles to. But no, in the Lord of the Rings, the elvish language is actually a fully written and thought out language.
Yeah.
It's not just random.
Attention. Yeah.
It's not some ramble. It's not just random words that put on the screen with dubs over. It's an actual Tolkien actually wrote the Elvish language. So it just little details like that makes the world so much investable, so much believable, and that's why I really love the Lord of the Rings.
No, the Lord of the Rings is a great trilogy. Did not make my ranking, but the first trilogy that I chose was one, which is quite an older trilogy, and that is the Indiana Jones trilogy. Now, I'm referring to this as a trilogy because Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out a long time afterwards, so I'm referring to this as its own trilogy.
I wouldn't count the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull as part of the trilogy because it's like, oh, after the third movie, oh, suddenly Indiana Jones has gone grey. Like, what the fuck's happened?
Yeah, exactly. But the Indiana Jones trilogy, it's always one that I can sit down and watch, and it's just action, great characters, memorable villains. Some of the like the fight scenes in this, or some of the set pieces in this, are very memorable. I mean, everyone remembers the boulder scene. Everyone remembers him shooting one of the masked bandits with the sword in Cairo. Yeah, they're iconic scenes. Plus, I would say each film offers something different. Raiders of the Lost Ark is probably one of the best paced films I have ever seen. Spielberg did an amazing job of making every scene in that film feel relevant. It weren't filler. Every scene felt relevant. And Raiders of the Lost Ark is a great adventure film. You're introduced to this heroic figure of Indiana Jones. Temple of Doom, I would say, is underrated. That is a much more darker, it challenges the characters more, and it offers something different. You can never say Spielberg doesn't offer something different when he does a sequel. The Last Crusade, my personal favourite. Sean Connery as Professor Henry Jones is amazing. Him and Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones work really well together. Plus, I love all the stuff about the Crusade and the Holy Grail. Some of it really does feel magical. It feels historical, but with that tint of possibility. Like, this could exist. Like, you know, you don't know. Something like this could exist. There's the potential there for it to exist. And I always think that the ending of this trilogy, once they found the Holy Grail, and he says, you know, what did you find? And he's like, enlightenment. And then they ride off into the sunset. That would have been the perfect way to end such an amazing trilogy. Yeah. Obviously, that didn't happen because, you know, studios are greedy. Yeah, phenomenal trilogy. Plus, John Williams' music, one of his best. Truly is exceptional.
Yeah,
I'm very sorry.
I completely agree. Indiana Jones, it didn't make my list, but it was something I did consider because Indiana Jones, you know, I really enjoyed. I thought it was a great trilogy, but it wasn't quite enough in my personal opinions to put it as like this is my favorite. Though I can agree why and see why some will very much enjoy this trilogy. It was up in the lists of a short list that I did put together before deciding on my top 3. Which is ironic that you've picked this one because it sort of plays into my next pick, which shares a lot of similarities. John Williams, George Lucas as the writer. I think you know where we're going.
Okay. Yeah, I think I do.
And that is, of course, the Star Wars sequel trilogy. No, man. I mean, The Last Jedi, absolutely amazing film, and The Rise of Skywalker, oh my god.
Yeah, that word just filler.
That twist with Emperor Palpatine at the end, oh my god, I did not see that coming.
No, amazing trilogy.
No,
I agree with you that.
Fuck that, no. It's the original Star Wars trilogy. Of course, I really did like the prequel trilogy. The Phantom Menace really let that down. I couldn't consider it because of the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones I have issues, but Star Wars Revenge of the Sith. Why couldn't every movie in that trilogy be like Revenge of the Sith? Because that was spot on, phenomenal movie.
If actions could tell 1,000 words, that's just what your actions did there.
Revenge of the Sith was, but Attack of the Clones and Phantom Menace, not so much. But the original Star Wars trilogy, A New Hope, all the way to Return of the Jedi. But of course, Empire Strikes Back is still, in my opinion, one of the best film sequels of all time, in my personal opinion, and we'll go down history as that. But the Star Wars trilogy, it was new, it was fresh at the time, and it still holds up today from a story perspective. It gave us adventure, it gave us meaning to characters that we've not seen before. And just diving into the tight attachment and bond between these characters and what it means for the wider impact of this galaxy were enriched in a lot of Star Wars. There's a lot of mystery to it that we don't quite see until later movies, but it's the probably the most iconic out of all my lists, in my personal opinion. It's the most iconic, you know. The twist of Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, you know, the music of John Williams made for a magical experience. And while, you know, we can sometimes overappreciate and take for granted these movies because of how old they are now and how much we've used them and taken ideas from them, this was the starting blocks for it all. This was starting blocks for big blockbuster sci-fi movies. Big advancements in cinema history in general. Lucasfilm, ILM, groundbreaking for cinema history, for visual effects. You know, we wouldn't get half these movies if it wasn't for the steps George Lucas and this film crew took to bring Star Wars to life. Like, it was groundbreaking at the time. but just the story of Star Wars, the mystery of how the Force works and how this geopolitical situation of galactic civil war could pan out, while also having that big fantasy, Jedi versus Sith type element to it, as well as a lot of, I wouldn't use the word realism, because of course space battles in space is not realistic, but in terms of like the geopolitical of side of things, of how a galactic civil war could come to play out, actually did strike a lot of believable similarities of how something like that could actually play out and operate. Of course, grand scale galactic conquest is something that we can't say is realistic at the moment, but it's believable.
Not yet.
and the inspiration it draws from our real world of how tyrannical, evil empires and dictatorships can rise up to challenge the world. Of course, we've not lived in a time in middle history where the world's been ruled by the likes of the Nazis, but it takes inspiration from those types, so it's relatable and somewhat believable how a tyrannical, almost impossible war machine can be defeated by people band together and having hope. And the message that Star Wars brings, and just the fun adventure, these new landscapes, these different planets, seeing space combat for the first time, the Force, lightsabers, just everything about it. Then of course John Williams music, everything about it. Iconic, perfect. Yeah, fantastic.
I want to say I agree with you, but I'd be lying. I'm probably 1% of the world who does not really care that much for Star Wars. I have seen the original trilogy, and I can appreciate it. I can appreciate it. I think I'm just that minority who are just not into Star Wars,
Yeah.
So, but I as you said, you've got to appreciate for landmark cinema. I mean, the cinema world transformed after that. Sci-fi really did come back after Star Wars was released, so very much. Now my second pick, movie trilogy, and this is kind of, this would not be on my list if I hadn't had grown appreciation for the third film in this trilogy, and that is the original Spider-Man trilogy, starring Tobey Maguire, directed by Sam Raimi. Now, this original trilogy was always high on my list. It was always held high. But with the MCU, it's made me appreciate these films even more, because these films are in their own class. They got their own identity. They're unique. It's like a comic book was brought to life on the screen. And obviously it was, because Sam Raimi, massive comic book fan. So he did these because he wanted to, because he loved it. Spider-Man, the original Spider-Man, fantastic origin story. That is how you do an origin story for a comic book film. Maguire, Dunst, they're great. Yes, it's a bit cheesy, but you know what? First love in high school, everyone has a crush like that. Everyone imagines conversations like that, because that's how you think relationships work. Plus, Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin, one of the best villain portrayals of all time, did such an amazing job in that. Spider-Man 2, one of the greatest comic book films, if not one of the greatest films ever made. Amazing, really well paced, a very emotional film. It challenges the characters really well, plus Alfred Molina's Doc Ock. Spider-Man 3, when I first saw it, I enjoyed it because I was fucking 7 years old. It would have been pretty hard to not enjoy it. Then, as I grew up through high school, it was, I don't like Spider-Man 3. But in recent years, I've come to appreciate it for what it is. With Sam Raimi as director, Spider-Man 3 does have some great themes there, and some of the stuff does work really, really well. I like the fact that it challenges the characters once again, and you can say what you want about Spider-Man 3, but every time Peter Parker ends up punching Mary Jane, that is really, even now, even though I know it's coming, like a moment, because you just see how far that character has come. And, a lot of films would shy away from making a character that unlikable, but they did, because they wanted to show that even heroes have their dark side. So I've got a renewed appreciation for Spider-Man 3. I think it is underrated, and it's because of that renewed appreciation that the Spider-Man trilogy takes a great spot on my list, because it's a fantastic comic book trilogy. And I would say, considering how people say the MCU is getting quite stereotypical, like there's a clear formula they use for every origin story. They should really look back and see what Raimi did with this trilogy, because he showed that you can do something different and it will be loved by fans for generations.
Oh, I completely agree, especially with the first two. And Spider-Man 2 is still one of my favorite superhero movies of all time. And if I had like a list of top movies of all time, Spider-Man 2 would definitely be in there for me. Of course, I struggle to put it on my list because of the third movie. While yes, it has a lot of good qualities. It started off really strong. I feel like, of course, Sam Raimi was very constrained with his creative direction and vision that he had for this movie. The studio put so much interference, having to force characters to do certain things and go certain ways of the story. Whereas if they just left Sam Raimi to do his creative vision he had originally for this movie, he could have all the good fit and strong elements that he put to this movie could have been the entire movie. But instead, the studio just had to interact and like water it down and throw their own shit in there. Whereas if all the good stuff, the good elements of Spider-Man 3 was allowed to, breathe and flourish like Sam Raimi had originally planned out, this trilogy would have gone down as probably one of my favourites and greatest of all times as well. Though I still agree, Spider-Man 3 still does have a lot of good elements. Sam Raimi still brings a lot of good Sam Raimi elements. It's where it falls apart is where it wasn't Sam Raimi. Is what brings it down.
Actually, I said just before you get onto your last one, there's actually a lot of heavy rumors, because Sam Raimi's actually come out and said he'd be quite happy to direct a Spider-Man 4.
Yeah.
Let it happen. Sony, Marvel, let it happen.
Yeah.
Get Tobey Maguire on board. Kirsten Dunst already said she'll do it. Give Raimi full creative control of that film.
That send-off he deserves.
Yeah, give Raimi full control, because it's not only a send-off for Maguire, it'd be a send-off for Raimi as well, because that's where, his directing of comic book films started. So make it happen. Someone make it happen.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with how you said that watching later movies has given you more appreciation for these movies, and especially it's even given me more appreciation for the Amazing Spider-Man as well.
Yeah,
seeing things like that. Of course, Amazing Spider-Man 2 still, but definitely the first Amazing Spider-Man has made me appreciate that movie a lot more as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely elements of Spider-Man 3, but yeah, definitely. It did make you think back, and it makes you think that Spider-Man 2 and films like that, how standout they actually are. Of course, before the MCU, they were already standout and one of my favorite movies of all times. But when you go back and think about it and think, this is just a great movie. I don't have to worry about the past 22 movies to have an idea of what the fuck's going on.
Yeah,
I can just
definitely.
I know Spider-Man. I love Spider-Man. I don't have to think Spider-Man. But what about Tony Stark and Captain America?
Well, wouldn't it be great? I mean, wouldn't it be great if you could... We're getting sidetracked here. Wouldn't it be great if you... I wish I could go back in time, or I wish I was born 10 years prior to 2000, so I could have actually gone in and seen this film when it was released. Because obviously that must have been so special, seeing a Spider-Man film for the first time, let alone Sam Raimi's Spider-Man film. And I think that, as you said, that really does make you appreciate some of the Spider-Man films, maybe even some of the older X-Men films. It really does make you think, well, actually, these are just good films. They're closed films. They're not connected to loads of things. That you can watch the film and enjoy it, and that's it. You don't have to stay behind to see if there's a post-credit scene to see how it's going to connect next. Yeah, I think part of it's nostalgia, but part of it's also not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to have to look back and say, well, actually, while we enjoy what we have now, what was back then was also very good.
Absolutely. Which brings us to number one. Now, I'm going to say this now, just in case, but me and Tommy, we like a lot of movies. We like a lot of the same movies. We have different opinions and rankings. But for our top pick, we've not discussed what our picks are going to be before this movie. But I somehow suspect that we might have the same top pick. And I think we should do a special edition where we both say at the same time and see if I'm right.
Okay, we'll do it on the count of 3.
Okay.
3, 2, 1.
The Dark Knight.
The Dark Knight trilogy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You knew it was coming. We're so stereotypical. You knew that was going to happen. Yeah. Well, what could it not be? I mean, you go first, but what the hell could it not be? It had to be this trilogy.
The Dark Knight. Now, this came from a strange era. You know, we had the Batman movies of the 90s where they got absolutely ridiculous and absolutely blown out proportion, absolutely ridiculous.
Yep.
And basically made a mockery of Batman towards the end of it. And then we got to this new period where we started to film like proper superhero movies like Spider-Man, X-Men. But then we had The Dark Knight, which was a completely different take and a breather in the space of the movie industry. And it was something new at the time. It's like Batman, but without all the stupid shit and bat nipples.
Yeah.
In a realistic and grounded environment that's actually believable. It was like Christian Bale was playing Batman. What the fuck?
Yeah.
Which was the reaction at the time when that was announced. But the Dark Knight trilogy, iconic, brilliant.
Oh god, yeah.
It's one of the few movie trilogies where, of course, I would always say the second one is the best. The Dark Knight,
definitely.
in general, as a standalone movie, is brilliant, fantastic. In fact, you could probably, even if The Dark Knight was just a movie on its own, now it would still go down as a fantastic movie. But the trilogy as a whole, you had Batman Begins, The Dark Knight Rises. Of course, some people have issues with The Dark Knight Rises. Some people say it's not as good as the others. Of course, when you follow on from The Dark Knight, it's hard to beat when you've put the bar so fucking high. It's hard to beat it in a way. So I think that's where a lot of people have issues with that movie. But as an overall package, seeing the development of Batman through start or to where he ends up performing the ultimate sacrifice in the last movie, it is absolutely groundbreaking and fantastic to see. The story choices they go, the characters, and how you actually come to like him and see Bruce Wayne grow as a character. It's not like some movies where you say, I'm Batman, and he's Batman all throughout. And he never changes. He's Batman. I beat up villains. That was his story. That was his story arc. You see the growth of Batman, and you see the conflict he has between Bruce Wayne and Batman. How he grows as Batman, but also you see him grow. How he grows as Bruce Wayne. Of course, you get to the point of where Bruce Wayne and Batman butt heads and meet at a point where they can't continue to coexist in the way they were. But just to see how they have characters grow from where they were, to see the world and how it works, and and of course we can't discuss Batman without talking about what makes Batman even more. Not Batman himself, of course. I think they got it perfect with Christian Bale's Batman.
Yeah,
of course some people take the piss out of his voice, but what makes Batman is not just Batman, it's his villains, his counterparts, the people he goes up against. And of course, you know, I like Cillian Murphy's Scarecrow in the first one. I like how Ra's al Ghul came into it.
Liam Neeson
and Ra's al Ghul. I like Ra's al Ghul. I like from the comics. I like a lot of the League of Shadows, League of Assassins, depending on what storylines and beats you come from and read. I like a lot of all that, and the fact that they brought it, the League of Assassins and Shadows, should I say, in this movie, into
the modern world, into the
modern world.
They brought it
into
the modern
way.
world.
That wasn't that Ra's al Ghul, some magic being that drinks the fruit
juice. No, grounded. Brought it in a very grounded way.
So fantastic villains, and of course, Bane. Tom Hardy as Bane was a great portrayal.
Yeah.
How they took that character, instead of this big beefed up, drugged up addict that wants to smash your heads in, you actually get a human being that's actually believable as to why he has a mask and why he's so broken and stuff, instead of just he's been drinking too much of the Kool-Aid. But then of course you can't then refute the Dark Knight and the Joker. The Joker defined the trilogy, I think.
Yeah,
of course Batman's great, but when you have the Joker, of course the movie was called The Dark Knight. You would say The Dark Knight's the main character, but of course when the villain takes the center stage, oh my god, just absolutely fantastic.
Definitely. I mean, Heath Ledger's performance blew audiences away. When you look before it was released, people were saying anyone but him. You know, they were slating it. They didn't want him, and he deserved that supporting Oscar award. An amazing actor. Gave it his all. Literally became that character. Got inside that character's head, and even though Joaquin Phoenix was also very good as Joker, Heath Ledger for me will always be the definitive Joker. And as you've said, I mean, the Dark Knight trilogy, Batman and Robin nearly killed comic book films, nearly killed the Batman franchise. Batman Begins, breath of fresh air. The closest thing we'd had to a Batman origin story was the 1989 Batman, when they briefly glossed over it. But this film, you got to see exactly what happened and how he trained up to become Batman. I mean, he's not even Batman until halfway through this film, which is actually quite a risky move to make, but they made it work. The Dark Knight, once again, one of the best comic book films ever made. If not, and I know I've said this during this video already, if not one of the best films ever made. I think a lot of people also underestimate the Two-Face story arc during the Dark Knight. That was done very, very well. Especially the final confrontation between Batman and Two-Face. The acting, the music, everything about that suspenseful movement when he's holding Commissioner Gordon's son and saying, "I'm about to make you suffer." That is, even though you know what's coming, you're on the edge of your seat. You're tense,
like, your heart's pounding,
because you know that it's coming.
Even when I rewatch it, my heart pounds in that scene.
Yeah, it's such a phenomenal scene.
Where the suspense has been built up, your heart's pounding and you really feel it. But but when you can rewatch it because you already know that's already been, you don't feel that such tight suspense because you know how it plays out. But this scene in The Dark Knight, when you rewatch it, it still gets you.
Yeah, it's still there. It's still there. And The Dark Knight Rises. Now, I'm going to be honest. I saw this trilogy back to front. I went to see The Dark Knight Rises. I was 11 years old, so I didn't have a clue what was going on. But then when we got home, we quickly watched The Dark Knight for some reason, and then Batman Begins. I know, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't, it didn't make any sense at the time. The Dark Knight Rises is underrated. I think it's the perfect conclusion to a trilogy. As you said, it would have been very difficult to beat The Dark Knight. What Nolan did was give us a film which was different. It was rounding up everything. It was adding new dimensions to the story as well as closing them off. And I know some people say, well, you know what, it would have been a better ending if Batman had got blown up by the bomb and then, that would have been it. But I really like the scene where Alfred sees, Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle having dinner at a restaurant. I really enjoy that scene. I think it rounds it off in a perfect way. It's like everyone got what they wanted. I mean, the only thing I would remove is the stupid scene at the end when it looks like Robin's taken over. For some reason, that didn't need to be there.
No.
But apart from that, The Dark Knight Rises is a great ending. Plus, Tom Hardy's Bane is phenomenal. That fight scene between him and Batman, they could not have got that better. Bane breaks Batman both physically and mentally, and that's done really, really well. So overall, the Dark Knight trilogy, fantastic from beginning to end. And I think it shows why Christopher Nolan is probably, in our generation, one of the best directors of our generation. I mean, everyone wants to be in a Christopher Nolan film now.
Yeah,
every single person.
The Dark Knight trilogy was like the Star Wars of like the first. What do you call the 2000s? The noughties, they call them.
Yeah, the noughties, right? The noughties.
Yeah, that was like it was like the Star Wars of that type of generation, I'd say, because the impact it had on cinema, on cinema.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the score from Hans Zimmer, how that's influenced so much cinema, the cinematography style and the tone, how that influenced a lot of movies to come, to the point a lot of films tried to copy and imitate their style, that it made them shit and the style drawn out. But the fact that Christian Nolan needed to only do 3, and for a lot of people to want to try and emulate and copy this, because he got it right, he got it perfect this time, and a lot of people took influence out, thinking, oh, if he's able to do it so perfectly, I want to try that into my movies and see if it makes it perfect. But no, but you got to do the tone right, and he mastered it. He mastered the style. He mastered the cinematography, and it worked. It worked in this universe. It worked for these characters. It worked for everything. It's that
No, I
magic
agree
that
with
was
you.
just that perfect matching that you can't recapture. You can't recreate the magic that he did. When you're trying to copy something or compare yourself to something, another genre, trying to be like another genre, trying to match magic that other people can create, you're never going to do it. You're never going to come as authentic. Whereas Christopher Nolan took this from his own vision and projected his own vision from his own thinking, his own passion, and was able to project it perfectly without having to try and be like something else. He wanted to be Batman like he wanted, not Batman like someone else wanted, or how Batman was beforehand, where people liked him beforehand. It was his own vision, and it came as authentic. And when it's raw and from the core, it makes a great cinema.
Well, actually, that's a really good point, because adding on to that, I think with every trilogy we've talked about on this list, films that have tried to capture what these trilogies did, 9 times out of 10 fail. I mean, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull tried to capture that magic, didn't work. The original Star Wars trilogies has been redone twice, the prequel trilogy and the sequel trilogy. Both times it's not captured that magic as the original trilogy did. And I've the Dark Knight trilogy, and I did do a video on this a couple of years ago. I called it the Nolan era, where basically comic book films began to be heavily influenced. The Amazing Spider-Man, heavily influenced by darker, more grounded comic book films. That started to end when Fantastic was released. That kind of ended that kind of era of dark and very grounded and gritty. So I think these trilogies we discussed are amazing. Like,
Absolutely.
they're first class cinema in the majority of cases. People try to capture this magic, and I think that's one thing, and I don't know how this has turned into some massive thing about film in general. People need to come up with unique ideas. You can't just copy what's been done before. You know, there'd been nothing really like Star Wars or nothing really like the Spider-Man trilogy before. But the reason they work is because the directors and writers and actors involved knew exactly what they were doing, and they just came up with a new idea. And I think that's what films are missing. And I know it's hard because you have the MCU at the moment. But I think cinema is getting a bit stale. Like the dominance of the MCU, the MCU is starting, I would say, to thin. It's starting to go a bit slower.
I completely agree.
Because obviously, once something's dominance for such a long time, sooner or later it's going to be challenged by something fresh.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see.
Because I've been watching Moon Knight recently and all the other Marvel movies. Of course, I was very excited for Spider-Man, but in terms of general excitement for movies, overall, in terms of most of the Disney stuff, that Marvel MCU stuff, like from Endgame, super hyped, pumped. Of course, I still enjoy. I still enjoy. Most of the MCU stuff, I still can sit and enjoy it, but I don't get that excitement, that buzz, that hype for it anymore that I used to.
I think that's because maybe we should do a separate video on this actually. You knew that it was building up to Infinity War and Endgame, like you knew the end goal. So year on year, it was more and more pumped. Now you don't really know where they're going. You feel like there's not a clear plan. So and plus the MCU is the most dominant force. I mean, it took out the DCU, it took out the Universal Monsterverse or whatever you want to call it. So, you know, but then you say that, but then look at DC now. They're just making films again, and some of them
basics of standalone superhero movies.
And some of them are working. The Suicide Squad, the Batman, they're Joker, they're working. It's working. Getting back to basics again, and maybe that's what we need, especially with comic book films. We need to go back to basics again. We've had the massive kind of cinematic universe, really is like an interconnected comic book. Maybe we need to go back to basics. Obviously, I don't think Marvel will ever do that because obviously it's too powerful now. You can't go back. But with DC, start afresh. Just try new things. If they work, great. If they don't, then lessons learned. Really, well, at least that's my opinion, my small opinion.
That is your opinion. It's incorrect.
Yes, it is incorrect. So anyway, I think that will conclude. I think that's a good point to conclude
Absolutely.
this video. I really do hope that you enjoyed watching this video. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe in order to receive great and maybe even improved quality content in the future. I would like to thank MLC once again for joining us on this discussion. It's always great.
You can
Yeah,
find
it
me
is always
across the
great.
webs. I have not uploaded on my YouTube channel for ages. You can find me occasionally on Twitch and Twitter, and I stream more on Twitch though I haven't recently because of uni work.
Yeah, follow them on Twitch actually because they're really good on Twitter. I watched one recently and it was really good. So shout out. Shout out. Awkward shout out. Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Make sure you subscribe to Movie Rewind. Don't forget that. Or as I will.
Yeah, don't forget that.
Or as I will find your IP address and track you down and hack your mum.
Yeah, don't say things like
that. Subscribe to Movie Rewind. Really good.
So anyway, guys, thank you for watching. We'll be back in May for another discussion to do. And we will see you in another one. See ya.
Bye for now, everyone.